Okay, let's get cracking. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Dan Prentice. I'm a professional officer here at the Queensland Nurses and Midwives Union, currently in our offices here at West End, and thank you for taking the time to join us tonight for a webinar around voluntary assisted dying. Now, what I'll do is I'll do an acknowledgement to country, read out a statement around safety and respect for meetings that and other events that we do, and then I'll introduce our speaker tonight, Leslie McLeod. So I think well, let's get cracking. Okay. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and waterways on which we meet today. For us here at the QNMU, it's the Turrbal and Jagera people, and to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Queensland and pay our respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islanders and First Nation members joining us tonight. Welcome. Now, just a very brief statement of safety and respect, which we preface every meeting with now. So the QNMU is committed to ensuring all its gatherings, including meetings, functions and events, are free from all forms of harassment, discrimination and racism. Attendees have the right to feel safe and respected, and we ask that all attendees act in accordance with these values. If you have any concerns, please raise them with the convener of the meeting, and that would be me, function or event, which tonight, as I said, will be me. Okay, so tonight we're looking at voluntary assisted dying. So the Voluntary Assisted Dying Act of 2021 is now legal in Queensland, allowing terminally ill people the right to choose to die with dignity in a manner acceptable to them. Tonight, Leslie will guide us through a number of things to help you better understand your roles and responsibilities, no matter if you are a nurse practitioner, registered nurse or carer who participates directly or indirectly in the voluntary assisted dying or VAD process. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker tonight is Leslie McLeod, who has been a registered nurse for 30 years and has specialised in palliative care for 25 years as a clinician, nurse manager and nurse practitioner. Prior to voluntary assisted dying, Leslie was the lead nurse for PalConsult at statewide palliative care education and support services. Leslie now works for the Queensland Health Voluntary Assisted Dying Support Service, providing support and advice to Queenslanders about voluntary assisted dying, whether they be professionals such as yourselves, families or patients themselves. I ask you to make Leslie very welcome here tonight. So many thanks again, everyone, for attending, and let's have a great session. Okay, over to you, Leslie.
Thanks, everyone, for inviting me to speak about my favourite topic, voluntary assisted dying. I thought I would I'll share my screen. What I thought I'd do is I'll break it up into sections and then give you time to ask questions. So we might ask the questions in sequence, and that way you don't have to remember what you were going to ask when you get to the end. We can put it in the middle. So just let me share my screen. Am I holding my tongue the right way? Just give it a minute.
Promising.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, we're good.
Excellent. So doesn't want to go. Oh, here we go. So in tonight's session, we're going to talk about who can get VAD, how VAD works in Queensland, because it's different here than it is in the other states, what the role of healthcare workers is, so registered staff and unregistered staff, some of the responsibilities that come with in aged care facilities, and what resources are available to you as clinicians and to families, and any questions you want to ask about this. I guess I like to acknowledge of any talk about voluntary assisted option, like all the end of life options, they are really complex, and people hold deeply personal views about voluntary assisted dying, the rights and wrongs of it, and how that should look in Queensland. And what we found is if we all come at this from a place of respect, and that means within our workplaces and across disciplines, that there's room for everybody's view. And we're always striving to do what's best for our patients or residents. And with voluntary assisted dying, it's no different. So just to be clear, voluntary assisted dying, it sounds like a bit trite to say this, but it really is for people who are already dying of something. So to get VAD, you have to have a terminal illness. You have to have an advanced progressive illness. So really what we're talking about here is not whether people are going to die of VAD. It's more about these are dying people who, because of VAD, can choose the timing of that death, so they can bring it forward than would happen naturally, and they can ask for assistance in that from health professionals. And that's changed. I mean, that's changed how we see ourselves, even, that we can now offer this service to people, and many of us are sort of a bit unsure if that's a good or a bad thing. But in Queensland, as of the 1st of January, it's a legal thing. So these are the eligibility to have VAD. So to be able to progress through the VAD process, you have to meet all these criteria. So you can't just have one or skip one because it doesn't fit. So like I said, you have to have an advanced progressive illness that will cause your death within 12 months. And because of that illness, you must be suffering intolerably. 2 independent doctors have got to say that you have an advanced progressive illness that will cause your death. So it's not even just one person who has to decide this. 2 doctors have to decide independently that you meet this criteria. You have to have your marbles. So you have to be able to make this decision. So have the capacity to do so throughout the whole process. So at any point in the process, if you lose that capacity for VAD, so you lose the understanding, the VAD process stops for you. And even till the very day they deliver the substance, if the pharmacist and the nurse show up to give people the substance, or the nurse shows up to administer the substance, if it's an IV, if the person has deteriorated and is unable to clearly state the intention, the process stops. So that's a very, that has to be met throughout the whole part of the journey. They have to be acting voluntarily and without coercion. So it has to be the person who is progressing this. So people can't ring up on behalf of their family and get the process going. The nurses and doctors involved really have to speak to that person. They have to be an adult, and they have to be Australian or have Australian residency, and they have to have lived in Queensland for at least the last year or have strong connections. So people have to meet all of that eligibility. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask about eligibility? Is that clear? I think one of the areas we find a little bit challenging is aged care. People in aged care are individuals with frailty. So these are people who probably will die in the next year. Maybe if you're 96 and you've got a couple of chronic illnesses, the chances that you're going to die in the next year probably pretty good. but I don't know that frailty could be considered an advanced progressive illness. And so for a lot of those people, they won't meet, the doctors won't push them through to the next part of the process because they don't quite meet the eligible condition. I can't see the pictures, Dennis, can you? And the questions, can you?
Lizzie,
Leslie, I've got a couple of questions so far. Do you want to go over them now?
Yeah, if they're about, oh, I can just see them. They've popped up on my screen. Yeah, it was just to keep all the eligibility.
Yeah, can a GP assess for eligibility?
A GP, it has to be an authorised practitioner. So if someone wants to be an authorised VAD practitioner, they have to apply, and a review board checks their credentials, if you like, and then they have to do 9 hours of online training. They have to pass a test, and then they gets reviewed again by the board. And if they're satisfied the doctor's met the requirements, they become an authorised practitioner. So it doesn't matter. We've got, there's a doctor who's a sexual health doctor. There's a doctor who's a paediatrician. There's a doctor they come from the wide gambit of specialities. But yeah, lots of GPs are authorised practitioners. So yeah, we have to have 2 doctors who agree that the person's eligible. No, an enduring power of attorney you cannot put a request for voluntary assisted dying in any kind of advanced care planning document. Certainly you can include it to say that you would be interested in it, but no, you can't ask for it on someone else's behalf who's lost capacity. So the minute someone loses capacity, that's the end of their VAD journey. How quick blind to the medicine. So it has to be a minimum. It sounds terrible. It's like when you buy solar or a pool, you've got like a 10-day cooling off period. Well, it's a bit the same with VAD. From the very first request to that doctor till the final review where they sign off and say, yes, you're eligible. It's a minimum of 9 days. And in reality, it probably takes people a couple of weeks, so 2 to 3 weeks to get all the way through the process, see all the doctors and have the substance, if that's what they're after, delivered. What about if there is a life-sustaining with death? Yeah, if someone says they're not going to have dialysis, so say they say, oh, I'm going to stop it and I want VAD, that's fine, because they would die if they didn't have it. So they can, there are people who, might have 18 months, an expected prognosis of 18 months if the GP, if they took their chemotherapy, but they're not going to have their chemotherapy, in which case their life expectancy would be much shorter and they would qualify for VAD. So yeah, people on dialysis who are going to stop can access VAD. So as long as it's expected if they don't have treatment. Has anybody got anything else about that eligibility? No. Okay. I might move on to the next part. So I talked about the process. So this is like a diagram of the process of VAD. And you can see, I find this a bit hard on the eye, and you can see from this that it's quite involved. It's quite a rigmarole for people to get through this, and keeping in mind that people who are going through this are sick. So you're not going to get VAD by accident. So you have to get through all these hoops before you're going to get the VAD substance and the opportunity you take it. So the 9-day bit, you can see is a bit ambitious when we all know how hard it is to get a doctor's appointment, and you know, so to get several, going to take a ask usually, so they would say, you know, I've been thinking about VAD, or can you tell me about it? And they'd like to make a request. And there, at that point, their doctor might say, well, I don't agree with VAD, or I don't know anything about it. And that doctor would have the responsibility, or nurse, I guess, of ensuring that they give them the information about someone who could help them. So for many people, they ring the service I work for, so that's QVAD, Queensland Voluntary Assisted Dying Support and Pharmacy Service, and they would say, I want to connect with the doctor who can help me. Can you put me through to them? And that's what we do. We link these people with practitioners that can help them. And then they do a first assessment. So the doctor figures out, do they meet all those 5 criteria? And if they do, the doctor then arranges for them to have a consulting assessment with that second independent doctor. If she agrees, the person has to ask again in writing for voluntary assisted dying, and then they meet the initial doctor again, the first assessing coordinating doctor. They make a final request. The doctor reviews all the documentation. They decide how that substance will be administered, so whether they're going to take it themselves or whether they need medical assistance with it. And they're going to appoint a contact person if it's the oral substance. The doctor then writes a prescription, which he sends to the pharmacy where I work at QVAD. And then that script waits there until the person contacts the pharmacy and asks for it to be delivered. Then a pharmacist and a nurse or a social worker will either take that substance to the person, or if it's going to be an IV administration, they take it to the practitioner who's going to give it. And then there's further documentation that's required if there's any substance left over, and if someone dies, whether they die of VAD or not, there's requirement for the VAD team to be notified. So you can just see that it's quite complicated, and there'd be lots of people who just wouldn't be able to get through this. So VAD isn't for everyone. When they're very sick, some people miss out just because they don't have the stamina to get to the end, which is of what something that's a very legal process. And when you think about it, it has to be this stringent. Like, it has to be, people have to trust that it's both the nurses and doctors that are involved in this are sticking to the rules, that it's very prescribed what they have to do. It's not left to interpretation, it's very clear. And all the documentation that's required goes through to the VAD review board, which is an independent review board that's been set up. And they don't approve people's VAD, but what they do is they review every case that's occurred for compliance. And if they're not happy that the nurses and doctors who are involved in this haven't done the right thing, they will, they have the ability to ask them to explain. They can refer concerns to APRA, or they can refer their concerns to the Queensland Police Service. So they have a lot of power, and doctors and nurses who are involved in this are scrutinised at every step to make sure that the public are sure that this is being conducted in a safe manner within the guidance of the legislation. So that's why it's so strict. How accessible is VAD for rural and remote people? Well, obviously Queensland is such a large state. You can see this is a lovely picture behind me of the drive between Roma and Charleville. A lot of big sky. And yeah, we're in the air 5 times a week. So at the minute, we actually are probably going to remote areas a bit more. I don't think they're being disadvantaged. We do have a fund available, so we have some money to either fly individuals and a family member to a practitioner if we can't get one locally, or we do have some practitioners, we have some funds available to pay for their travel time to get them to a practitioner. And so in some areas where there aren't lots of practitioners, we can sometimes send one from Brisbane. So again, it's just to make sure there's a bit of equity. Not sure. Maybe I'll come back to that, Jan. I'm not sure about a death doula in the VAD process. Maybe for some people. Some of that, I'll maybe talk a bit about what the HHSs provide. I haven't come across a death doula for a VAD person yet, but it's early days. So let me just talk about healthcare workers. So in Queensland, VAD's essentially medically driven. So to be a coordinating or consulting doctor and authorized practitioner, it's only doctors who can do that. So only a doctor can, authorized doctor can check if a person's eligible and get them all the way through that process. Only a doctor can be the consulting practitioner. So that's just to someone else to review that initial decision. The role for nurses as authorised practitioner comes in as an administering practitioner. So sometimes, for some reason, if someone chooses to have IV substance delivered, it can be a doctor who administers it, or it can be a nurse who has undergone the authorised practitioner training and authorization process. They don't have to be a nurse practitioner. You have to be a nurse with 5 years experience, and you have to have completed all the mandatory training for it. But I have to say we have a lot of nurses who've signed up for this. So in excess of 150 nurses across Queensland have become authorised practitioners. The default administration is oral. So we would like if people had the oral substance where they can, for lots of reasons. It gives them autonomy, ability to plan in advance, keep the stuff for a time in the future when they want to do it, take it, and then they can take it at a time that suits them and their family. With IV administration, obviously, it's got to suit the practitioner as well. But there are some patients who can't swallow, don't want to swallow the substance, have trouble with nausea, have gut problems, absorption problems, and the IV substance is indicated for them. And depending on where they are and depending on who their doctor is, sometimes that doctor will transfer the administration to a nurse. Usually the nurses who've been doing it the most, so we have had nurse administrations, the nurses who are doing it the most tend to be in VAD roles. So they're employed by their HHS as a VAD nurse. But it just depends. Sometimes if you have a good relationship with a practitioner and sometimes the timing for a family might be that it's the nurse who's the best place to give it. So it might just suit. But normally doctors who do IVs are doing it themselves, but they can pass that role over to be a nurse. So the other way nurses are involved is if about giving information to patients, residents and their families. And so what the legislation says is nurses cannot, other than nurse practitioners, cannot initiate a conversation about VAD. So any doctor or nurse practitioner can initiate a conversation about VAD as long as it's in the context of a discussion about other end-of-life options. However, if a patient or their family ask you about VAD, so they initiate the conversation, registered nurses can have that conversation with them. So you say, oh, I know a little bit about it, or I know nothing about it, but I know someone else on the team knows, or can I give you this website, or here's the phone number, ring and ask these people. But if someone brings it up with you and you know about it, of course you can talk about it. So you can talk about it with family and you can talk about it with patients. So that's all this table really says. So I think sometimes in a bit of the marketing about VAD in the lead up to this, nurses had it in their head they weren't allowed to talk about it. That's not the case. You can't bring it up as a topic, but if they bring it up with you and you feel confident to talk to someone about it, please do. My slides don't want to advance. Let me just see. So it says, oh, Kimberly, what did you say? It says, does the medication always have to be administered and are they responsible? So what are the steps? What are the steps on becoming an RN? Yeah, you just apply, you go to the website. So you put in Queensland Voluntary Assisted Dying. There's a button on the web page and it takes you there. You have to supply. It was really difficult. As in, I had to find my initial certificate from when I did my nurse training in the 80s. So they wanted all your qualifications, your CV, some references, and you just submit all of that, and then they let you do the training, and then you sit the exam, and then so you can do it in a weekend. But we do have a lot of nurses, and I'm not sure that we're necessarily using them very wisely, but it's really great training to do, but it's long, it's 9 hours. So that's what the training is. The training doesn't give you, it's about the legal training and understanding the legislation. So it doesn't give you, doesn't show you like how to cannulate or give IV drugs. It's kind of expected that you have those skills and knowledge. Will this happen in the person's home? So people can take VAD anywhere. So they can take it in their nursing home, they can take it in the hospital, they can take it at home. So wherever just like any end of life option, it's wherever they feel more comfortable and wherever their family can manage. The oral substance people take themselves. They usually don't have a practitioner with them. They take it themselves with their families. But if they ask, most HHSs, or if they ask us at QVAD, we're happy to be with them while they take it. And obviously, if you have an IV substance, you're going to have a nurse there, and we recommend, or a doctor, and we recommend if the doctor goes, he takes a nurse with him. If a nurse goes, she takes a nurse with her. Just everybody needs work when they do this. No, the script is written and given to QVAD, and the script sits there, so the person doesn't go anywhere to get the substance. We deliver it to them. It can only come from one pharmacy, so that's our pharmacy at 8 Mile Plains, and it's all very regulated. And I've got, in a couple of slides time, I'll show you what it looks like. So I might move on. Sorry, Colleen, oh, here it goes. So there's lots of talk about healthcare worker participation and lots of talk about conscientious objecting. So nobody's going to be asked to be involved in VAD. Nobody's going to be made to. It's optional, and that's enshrined in law. So people are allowed, just like they are for termination of pregnancy, to conscientiously object. They don't have to be involved in it. But I guess if that is happening in your workplace and you are a conscientious objector, that you probably need to be letting at least your manager know, so that it might just be you say, look, I have very strong Catholic beliefs, and I find the whole business upsetting. If you've got a patient or a resident who's going to have VAD and you don't want anything to do with it, you can ask to be rostered on another shift or work in another area. So that's allowed, and most workplaces have made the capacity for that. However, if you're a conscientious objector and someone asks you about VAD or asks you how to access it, you cannot say, I'm a conscientious objector, therefore I can't help you. So the law says, yes, you can object, but it can't be at the expense of someone else's autonomy. And the minimum you have to do as a registered health professional is give them either the name, connect them with someone who can help them, or give them a phone number or somewhere else, tell them how they can find that help. And again, nobody's ever going to ask you to mix a VAD substance unless you want to. Nobody's ever going to ask you to be in the room when someone takes VAD unless you've been invited. And there is no expectation that anybody would have to do that as part of their normal work. I guess what I would say is, if you look at healthcare workers or views about VAD on a continuum, so this, at the far end, you've got the conscientious objectors. And there are some people who are conscientious participants. They're really keen. They think it's a great idea. They want to be involved. So we got both ends of the spectrum as nurses. But for most of us, we're kind of somewhere in the middle. So we might think, oh, well, if this is a decision that someone's considered, and it is a considered decision, I'd be happy to help. I'd be happy to, and I think it's just figuring out on the continuum where you sit, and maybe the realization about how you feel about that and where you sit on this continuum might depend very much on where you work. It might depend on and how well you know the person. It might depend about what your colleagues think, because we're all influenced about that. Your organization might be a conscientious objector, so that might influence your decision. So I think, it might be what condition the person has might influence your decision. So for example, if they've got terrible breathlessness that nothing responds to it, or if they've got a head and neck cancer, they're disfigured, they've got leaky stuff, you might think, oh, for this person, VAD's okay, but there might be someone else that you think, I couldn't help them with VAD, because if they just had their dialysis, they wouldn't die, and I don't feel right about helping them. So it's just trying to figure out where you sit and being respectful of your colleagues who might sit somewhere else on this continuum. And also the reminder is patients and relatives need usual care. So whatever you do, whether you want to participate or not, it doesn't give you, we are still as health professionals responsible for giving the regular care that person decides. So on the day that they might have VAD in a resident in a facility, they're still going to need a shower like they normally do. Their family are going to be upset because this person who they love is dying. Somebody's still going to have to reassure them, comfort them, make them a cup of tea, all of those things that are usual care. After they die, people die, they need a life extinct done. That's, to me, is part of usual care of the body, washing them, preparing them for the funeral director to come. That's not a bad thing. This was a dying person who died 3 weeks earlier because they took VAD. Usual care, I think, can't be compromised in that situation. And so it's really good for us all to think about where we might sit on this and what might change that from day to day, week to week, patient to patient. Do you got any questions about that? Has there been much talk in your workplace? Is somebody with a cough's got their microphone not on mute? Who's that? They don't want to tell us, Dennis. Has there been much talk in people's workplaces about how they're gonna? So the risk, Shiva, so we're lucky in Queensland. So the question is, have we considered the risk of providing such strong medication to administer by themselves at home whenever they wish? Well, as a palliative care nurse, I would tell you we already give people really strong medications that they manage at home. And in fact, people have truckloads of opioids and S8 drugs at home anyway. So I'm probably less worried about that. In Victoria, they've done, because in Victoria, they've been doing voluntary assisted dying for 3 or 4 years. They've dispensed, they've had over 750 deaths. Nobody has lost their substance, and nobody has died who wasn't supposed to of taking the substance. So people take the responsibility of having this drug very seriously. The drug is in a lockbox, only they have the key. It's hidden in their home. They have a contact person, so they have someone who is like a family member who, if something happens to that person, they have responsibilities about returning the unused substance and notifying the VAD board of their person's death. And there are financial penalties if they don't do it, so they have to get it back. So because of all that, and in nearly 4 years, Victoria has had no problems with that. So I don't worry about it being in people's houses because we haven't had any evidence that that's a problem. I'm just looking. Yes. So I looked at our database and I found 18 residents of nursing homes who were either completed the process or who were in the process of the process. And that was just a quick look. So that's the ones who are far enough through it that they've had connection with QVAD, so that a prescription's been written. So we're only 13 weeks into VAD. So That's actually pretty good when you think that many patients wouldn't have capacity to get through it all. So there are residents who have. I might come back, Rebecca. Let me just talk about obligations of the private entities, and then maybe I'll tell you what it's like when someone takes a substance. Is that all right? We'll just get to that. So Joe, to answer your question about how many people have had VAD in the 13 weeks we've been going, only the review board knows that, because they have to be notified whether someone who's gone through the process either dies of VAD or doesn't die of VAD, dies of something else. But what I can tell you in QVAD is how many prescriptions we see. So that's not the same as deaths, but it's people who've got through, and where there's over 150. So VAD's been embraced wholeheartedly in 12 weeks. Yep. So can I just tell you a bit about the responsibilities of aged care? So in other states, in their legislation, they let nursing homes and private hospitals, entities as they call them, they let them conscientiously object. And they've said, if you don't want to have to do anything about VAD in your facility, you don't have to. And with Queensland, our law's a bit better and it's a bit more considered, because what it says is, it is split it up, particularly for aged care residents, because they just felt that blanket, you don't have to have VAD in your facility if you don't want, sort of undermined people's autonomy. And also, I'm not saying it probably doesn't even stop people doing VAD in a facility. It just means that they tend to want to hide it. So some of these places that have said they wouldn't have VAD in their facility, what's happened is people have taken VAD and the staff weren't prepared because it was never going to happen. And then when it did, everybody was shocked. So in Queensland, it's a bit more considered, but it divided it up. So certainly for aged care, if a resident lives in a nursing home, that's considered their home. And so the rules for VAD have to be a bit adapted for that. So private hospitals have a bit more control, nursing homes less so. There's more consideration of individual autonomy in this. So if it's a person's usual place of residence, you have to give practitioners, VAD authorized practitioners, you have to give them access. So you can't, if you're an aged care facility, you can't stop VAD practitioners coming in to do assessments. No, sorry. Every now and again, it just stops advancing. So what they're saying is, you can't stop practitioners coming in and doing assessments. But for some private hospitals, they can ask that the VAD substance is not administered on the premises. And so for those patients or residents, they have to be transferred somewhere else. And we know how easy that is not, but that's not possible. So yeah, so nursing homes have to let practitioners in, and practitioners won't ever just show up, or they shouldn't. They should be talking to the manager, tell them they're coming, and give them the chance to check their credentials. So QVAD, where I work, we keep a register, and you can ring us up and say, there's a Dr. Smith going to come and see one of our residents. Can you just confirm that they're what their VAD number is, and that they're registered as an authorised practitioner? And so people should be doing that before letting people come if they don't know them.
Leslie, do you
I'm
want
going
me to
to,
share my screen?
yeah, could you, it's just frozen. So will I
Okay.
stop sharing?
Stop share and I'll start sharing. Just bear with me, sorry.
So anyway, there is, if you go to the VAD webpage, which is Queensland VAD, there is a private entity guidance. So it's not the most exciting thing you've ever read, but it does clearly state what the responsibilities are for aged care facilities and private hospitals. And most aged care facilities today have not required people to be moved. And they have been letting practitioners access their facilities, and they have been supporting the VAD practitioners when they come for residents who want to do VAD. I've probably talked too long about the other thing. The next thing I wanted to talk about was about the oral substance, particularly because if you have any patients who've got this stuff, it's good for you to know how it's got to be stored and what does it look like, and anything you have to sorry, so there you go. It just says if they're a resident and they live in the nursing home, you can't really hinder them, and you can't you can't stop them taking it, and you got to let their witnesses and their practitioners in. For the private hospitals, it's not so strict, but they have to help you, and most of them are, although obviously some of the faith-based facilities, it's just harder. It's just harder, and it that having to find somewhere to transfer patients to just chews up the days for some people, that limits their ability. So some patients lose out on having VAD, if for want of a better word, because it just takes us so long to find them somewhere to go to have it if they can't be discharged from hospital. So can you click on through, Colleen, to the next one? I just want to, so that's the private entity guidelines that tells you what the law says that private entities have to do. And this is the document they should be using to make their policies, procedures surrounding VAD. Next slide. So when the substance comes, there's a combination, there's some S8s in there, there's an S8 drug, and there's a DS4. So if you want to click the next slide, this is what the box looks like. So that's about the size of an A4 piece of paper, the box. And inside the box is some pre-meds. So there's 2 antiemetics and a fast-acting benzo, lorazepam. And that's there for a pre-med. And then the actual, so they take that, a person who's going to take the VAD substance would take that approximately an hour before, because we don't want them to, we want, the substance only works if you take it, and we want it to get absorbed as quickly as possible. So you have an empty stomach, you take the antiemetics and the benzo if required, and then the actual substance is in that locked box. So it's a powder, and the powder gets mixed with that Aura Plus liquid, 30 mils, and put it in, mix it with the powder, 30 mils. It tastes terrible. So can I say again, it tastes terrible. But it's only 30 mils on an empty stomach after the pre-med. And I said in Victoria, they've had more than 750 deaths, and no one, this is my Scottish back to front way of saying something. No one has not died. Does that make sense? So it is really effective if you take it all on an empty stomach. You should remain upright for 20 minutes. That's what they say. My experience has been that people lose consciousness within 5 minutes of swallowing the substance, and they've usually died somewhere within 20 to 40 minutes. I've seen lots of people die, and I have to say it was challenging, and I think I was just surprised about how effective the drug is. We did have a case of a woman who took a long time to die, and the reason for that was she fell asleep before she took the whole amount. So it is really important that people can swallow. And if someone is planning on taking the oral substance and their condition changes and you think, oh, they might not be able to swallow it all, and it does taste terrible, they should be contacting them or their family, or the facility should be contacting their coordinating practitioner to say, I don't think they can swallow this anymore. And the doctor could write a new prescription and give them it intravenously. So just because it's been prescribed doesn't mean you can't get another one. But, people really have to be able to swallow the whole amount and swallow it quickly. And the administrative decision can be changed. Yes, and you can have it enterally. So along with this, Jan, yes, you can put it down a peg. With this box that I'm showing you, there's an envelope, a folder that goes with it, and in there are step-by-step instructions of how to prepare and take the substance. There's a video on for people who can't read or prefer to watch something. In the packet, we have an ARP, so an advanced resuscitation plan. We have a life extinct form. We have an expected death letter, so a letter that says, if you've been called to see this person, like a paramedic, someone in the community, this is an expected death. Can you please come in? These are the doctors involved in their care. Can you please fill in a life extinct? Say something about that. So there is a lot of information that goes with the kit that gets given to the person. And then there's also comprehensive instructions about disposal. So if the person takes the substance and they take it all, as they should, there's really nothing to dispose of. So the boxes can be recycled. They've taken all the medicines. The box can be thrown away. The nothing. If the person dies and they've still got the kit, then it does have to be returned to a pharmacy. And so there's instructions in your that it's the contact person, so that family member who I said was responsible, they have to take it back. And there's instructions for what has to happen to it. And there's even a little drug waste bin for them so that they can mix it up, put it in the bin, and the drug's denatured, and then it can be disposed of safely. So that's what they do. In your facility, how you store it is pretty much up between you and the person. You can't lock it away in the drug cupboard unless they agree to that, because the idea is they have access to it, reasonable access to it. And so lots of places are just keeping it in a locked cupboard, like a bedside table. The law for this says it doesn't have to be signed into your drug book. It doesn't have to be written on the medicine chart. But most facilities feel understandably anxious about it and come up with an arrangement. I mean, my suggestion for this is if it doesn't have to be there, if they're not taking it today or this week, it could probably go home with the contact person and be brought in at the time it's going to be used. And there's got to be some compromise about that so that it's safe for others, but people have access to it. Can you go to the next slide? I'm just wary of the time. So QVAD, which is the support and pharmacy service, we take calls from patients, residents, family members, facilities. Anybody who's got any interest in VAD can ring us. They get to speak to a nurse or a social worker on the phone, and we take it from there. Help link them to facilities, help them link them to practitioners, or get them the information they need. We come and do education if that's useful. We do seminars like this. So there's, you know, we are just trying to help make sure that these VAD services work and that people have access. And we also run that scheme I told you about that either contributes to the travel costs for individuals trying to get to a practitioner, or for a practitioner to get to there. Can you do the next slide? So that's a 1-800 number for that. Each HHS also has a VAD service, so there'll be, normally it's a nurse and a part of a doctor. So wherever you are, these are the local service. So you can ring us and we connect you, or you can email them directly, and they're the ones in your area who might come to your facility and see someone. And between us and them, we make sure that the stuff gets delivered and is safely administered. So, and how they work is slightly different. They all do their own thing a bit differently. But it's good to, once you've met them all once, it's much easier. Next slide. There is a huge amount of information and resources available about VAD. The QVAD handbook there on the side, it's 271 pages of information, so it's a considerable book. There's even a short version. There's information about every part of the process. There is an online training module that some facilities make it mandatory. So some health services make it mandatory, some nursing homes make it mandatory. It's a 45-minute education module through iLearn, and you don't have to be a Queensland Health employee to access it. You access it from the website, and it gives your staff all that legal information that they need about who can do what, who can answer questions, what your requirements are as an entity. That's all in there, and it's 45 minutes, nice and neat, and it's a good way for facilities to ensure they meet their obligations. Next slide. Yeah, I'm happy for people to email me if they've got any questions. Our QVAD support at health website it's a busy website, but we'll always get back to you or point you in the right direction. So is there any more? I can't see the questions just before. We've got not very long, have we, Dennis?
Leslie, we're right on 7. There
Yeah.
hasn't been any more questions
Okay.
since the PEG question. There was one earlier, way earlier, about how to find an authorised practitioner. Now, I'm not sure if you responded to that one.
No, you have to ring us, because authorised practitioners, we talk a lot about privacy, and they get privacy too. And so there isn't like a list we share with people. So when someone asks us for an authorised practitioner, we are trying to consider the geography of where you live, like we have authorised practitioners who only want to see their own patients. They don't want to see random people. Some of them only want to see cancer patients, or they only want to see particular, or they only want to see people every third Thursday in the afternoon between 2 and 4. So when we're looking at geography, but we're also trying to match up that authorized practitioners' interests in what they want to do. So we've got lots, but again, we have lots of doctors who've done this for their own interest, and they only want to see their own patients. So that's why we don't just publish a big list for people. And some of them want us to email them, some of them want us to text them, some of them, you can imagine, some of them don't want their GP rooms to be contacted. They haven't told MD at their practice. So it's quite involved. So it's best just to ring us and we'll link people. Now, I was just going to ask quickly, Kat, putting you on the spot here because you said someone in your facility had used the substance. I was just going to ask you how it went. Kat's thinking, I don't want to talk. Are you still there, Kat? I think what I've found is amazingly the nursing, certainly, yes. Hi, Ashley. Did you want to share how it went? Oh, yes, way quicker. It's very efficient, the drug. What about you, Ashley?
Yeah, really well. It was a really nice experience in community care, oral substance. Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah. What's the action of the drug? So, believe it or not, there is a Commonwealth law which impacts FAD every day. So this law says that it's a criminal offence to talk about to share information related to suicide. Now, every piece of VAD legislation says VAD is not suicide, but the lawyers can't agree on whether some aspects impinge this criminal code. So for me telling you what the drug's called or explicitly saying what it is can actually put me at risk of prosecution, which is just crazy because VAD is not suicide and blah, blah. So you can Google the drugs. If you Google VAD substance Canada, for example, it will tell you what the drug is. We use the same drug as everybody else, but it's a really big, so it's not an opioid, I can tell you that. It's not an opioid. So it's a really big dose of the drug, and that's what makes it so effective. And essentially, the drug gets absorbed in your stomach, hits your brain, and just stops you breathing. Like it just very efficiently shuts your brain down. And so, and for the individual taking it, it's very gentle. You can talk about some parts of the assessment can be done on telehealth, but not the part that talks about the choice of whether you have oral or IV, or explains to the person what the substance is. No, that has to be done face to face. And again, it just makes something that's complicated even more complicated, you see. We're hopeful that there's a Labour government in the federally now, and it is on the agenda to just, like literally for this, called the Carriage Act, and they would just have to put one line that says this VAD's exempted from this, and then that would make it much easier. And again, this act is causing problems. So for example, the prescriptions have to be hand delivered to us. We can't get them by email. We can't get them by fax. They have to be posted. Can you believe it? By snail mail to get to us, because you're not allowed to transmit any material that can be considered suicide or have suicidal ideation in it. So a bit crazy, but we're kind of trying to work around it as best we can.
Okay. We're about on time, I reckon. We've had a really good session
That's
tonight.
not too
So
bad. It's a big topic.
yes, very big. Now, any last questions before we?
Dennis, that's the thing. It's a big topic. So many things.
You might have to give me a second, sorry, just give me a second. Sorry, can I give you a call back in 2 seconds? Okay, cool.
Well, thanks everybody. I'm glad we can share it. And if at your workplaces you think some in-service would be useful, we're happy to do it on Zoom. I have some really great staff and we take it in turns doing these things, and it's really good. Or if some of you, if we're coming to your facility, come and say hello. The aged care facilities have been quite nervous about this, but I have to tell you, they have been without fail helpful and supportive when we come. And you know, it's not easy, but they've been great at supporting us as nurses, so that's been terrific.
Okay. Lots of thank yous coming up, Leslie. I think if everyone's okay, we might finish there. Leslie, I'd like to thank you very much. That was exceptionally informative, and I think the value is that you're now telling us about that now that the laws are in place and have been used, and I think that's very important. The QNMU has been exceptionally impressed by the whole VAD team right from the get-go, and I certainly can't praise them too much for all the communication they've had with us and assistance, etc. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank everyone who dialed in thank you very much. I hope you got a lot out of this. I'm sure you did. And thank you to Colleen doing the stuff in the background. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colleen.
So I think we'll call it a night. Say thank you, everyone, and see you at the next webinar.